My brain hurts, because making an optimized build in Monster Hunter is absolutely insane because of the sheer amount of decorations and interactions inside of the game. So that's what we're going to be breaking down. If you enjoy the video, or if it helps, please leave a like, share with your friends, and comment your thoughts down below. Because another problem is that everything works differently depending on your weapon. So I'm going to be going off of a sword and shield breakdown, even though I'm a hunting horn main, but you can take away like a lot of the similar stuff depending on your weapon and the numbers, and just like good guidance, because we aren't even at the point yet of, oh, this is like the perfect min-maxed optimized build for real this time, guys. It's still just like taking a lot of the bits and pieces and base understanding of the game, and then also incorporating it into your playstyle or where the current idea of the game is. So this guy did the math on Sword and Shield to a crazy degree, to where every 1 raw damage is roughly equal to 4.3 elemental damage. If you're deciding on skills and you find that you could have X amount more raw or element, you should go for raw as long as it's better than a 1-to-4 ratio. And that's pretty much what I've heard from the Monster Hunter community, is like the answer is always raw. That raw damage is king. That if you have the chance of getting raw damage, you take it. But what if I have this idea where I raw damage, but my build, I swear I'm going to go for element raw damage, except in like specific cases, and we're going to like go into the numbers. But this is why the math kind of goes into that. And then factoring in critical damage and critical parts of the game, you want to aim for these numbers, at least on Sword and Shield. And that's also where it gets kind of weird, because Sword and Shield has a much lower attack than other things. I'm using Hunting Horn. I can have 800 to 1,000 attack. So that means I'd have to like go in, do this guy's entire process, and then redo all the numbers and math to get my own ratios. And then you have to factor in basic math and diminishing returns, because 200 base attack on the sword getting 10 raw, that's a 5% damage increase. However, getting 10 raw on 1,000 base attack is a 1% damage increase. That means affinity is going to be more powerful because it's multiplying your base values. And the reason why the damage calculation is so weird and optimizing a build just stops making sense at certain points is because of how like element factors into raw. It's not a 1-to-1, and again, it's going to change depending on like your weapons and your builds and all that other stuff. So this guy did all the math, and that's where he came up with all of his numbers. And then once you have the base formula, you can apply that to all the individual skills and get a rough idea of how effective everything is. Also, critical element is like the biggest scam in the game. So note on critical element, in general, it's not going to be worth it. It makes the elemental portion of your crit worth 15% more. So you might read it and think, wow, I'm just doing crazy damage. It's probably the least intuitive thing in the game, because you read it, greatly increase elemental damage while active. Well, you already have to go a little out of your way for elemental damage, and affinity has to be earned to actually get the crit. So you'd imagine you get a really big reward out of it. No, you're not even like multiplying the entire crit by 15%. It's just the elemental part, which is like a 1-to-4 ratio or whatever lowered ratio, and then that's only getting a 15% boost. So yeah, unless it's like there's something weird on certain weapons where you want to go critical boost, and then depending on the base damage of your weapon, that affinity infusion is going to be better than attack infusion, and then you're allowed to have an elemental jewel plus a crit element jewel, and the crit uptime is like good enough. Or if you're also playing like weakness exploit, then you actually come out like 3% damage positive. But that would take an incredible amount of resources, and then you have to like test it an insane amount to actually get to that point. So again, that just kind of shows like how complicated everything is. But for now, before it's actually, oh, we're 500 hours deep into the game, 6 months down the line, and everyone's done all the math for everything, Burst. You just play Burst. Burst is the best. That's all you need to know. Burst gives 18 raw and 140 element with 5 consecutive hits. That means at 200 raw, Burst 5 gives more raw damage than attack 5. And if you're like actually comboing and playing well, that means you're just naturally better than attack 5 by having Burst 5, and it gives you the free elemental damage. So that's also where the consideration for like an Ardean weapon comes in as well. And it's going to be different from weapon to weapon, though. So that's going to be something that needs to be individually tested. And that's like also kind of weird. So the effective time of burst is 4 seconds. So you have to land 5 hits in 4 seconds. But after you do that, you only need to land 1 hit every 4 seconds to keep it fresh. And then there's also a set that can extend it. And the set itself is kind of yikes that we don't get a lot of slots, but it gives us the burst 5, which is incredibly valuable because this is going to take a level 3 socket for just 1 burst level. So that's like a 15 effective decoration level right there. Divine Blessing and Bleeding Resistance pretty good, and the earplugs. So the idea is like your glass cannon, you might actually get lucky and bailed out on the Divine Blessing, but then your stats are not looking too great. However, there might be an angle where you just splash in 2 pieces for the burst boost 1 because that extends your duration by 1 second to actually set up the burst, and you get a little bit of benefit from it. That also means I think the burst charm might actually be the play for most builds, or it's actually going to be the chain charm. So chain gives you burst. It doesn't help that the game doesn't name the decoration after the skill, and you also have to search around for the skill info, and then you don't always get the exact numbers on that skill info. So yeah, it's like, oh yeah, you want chain. What's chain? It's burst. What's burst? That's successful attacks give you benefits if you hit like 5 attacks in a row. So trying to like mentally put everything together, yeah, that kind of gets rough, but you can get a chain charm too, which has an effective 6 value for decorations. So that'd be pretty good, where it's just like, yeah, you get a couple of pieces, and then you put the rest into the talisman, and then you have a lot of other things to work with. But that's not like, oh, this is actually the best and optimized. And also, you have to think about other things. You can get a Defense Talisman 4. So Defense 4 might like offset a lot of these bad things, and then it gives you Burst 5. Where you run 4 pieces, get Burst 4, and then you run like a better piece of armor that actually has like a level 3 decoration slot or something. So yeah, that's just like a small part of how you want to run this, but it also means like, yeah, you don't have to run the that set to get the burst. You can find it in other places, and then that's why I think the talisman is really powerful, but it's just like the general best one. And then element attack is good. So we talked about how like element is fraudulent, but element attack itself is just kind of free if you don't really worry about that. Where like, yeah, you have an Ardean weapon, it just comes with natural, like, really good element stuff, and then you can just put an element jewel, and the math checks out. You get a free 20% boost, and then there's also a bonus on top of that, and that's going to help out all of your numbers a lot. And the best one on top of that is going to be the Razor Sharp bonus, because one thing that these guides actually aren't taking into consideration is the damage you get from Sharpness. Sharpness is a damage buff. Sharpness skills are damage skills because of damage uptime. Where like, oh, you're not in the middle of your combo, or the fight's getting extended, and then you're actually eroding your damage with the Sharpness. So if you can find that Sharpness, that's also pretty good. And then we can see that, yep, attack. I don't have to attack 3 jewels because skill issue, I guess. I didn't farm Nightflower Pollen enough. And I guess it doesn't really matter because attack goes up to 5, so again, on a high base thing like a Hunting Horn, yeah, you actually really want that 4%. That 1 attack 3 jewel is bad because it's 7, so you're getting like almost nothing. But then, you get that 4% on an 860 or 900 or 1000, well now that's going to be better than anything else according to the math because it's giving you a ridiculous amount of raw. But that also means that maybe the optimization is you go Expert Jewel 3, Critical Jewel 3, and then you run like an attack charm. That if I'm going for the Healing Horn, so yeah, here we have the Grudge Sounder, which is a Healing Horn that has 1,000 base attack and like negative affinity, so crit element will never work on this, but we also want to make sure our Horn Maestro gives us the most effect possible, that it increases our healing, so we're kind of already bricking a slot on the Sonorous Jewel. So yeah, every weapon's crazy, but the raw equivalent on element attack 3 is going to be really high, burst is it, and then filler is going to be good for attack 5, and then there's like other things. So offensive guard, at 15% raw, offensive guard is worth 30 raw, so if you can regularly block, you get crazy value out of this. There's also a lot of people going towards like agitator builds, but you don't have full control over monster enrage, even though it does give you a lot of stats. So that's another interesting thing about like burst, element attack, and attack. A lot of the other ones are going to be situational and skill based. So like you just get like a very strong base on like attack, element attack, burst, and whatever. And then the rest is just going to be playstyle. And that goes into the other kinds of builds where if you are going for affinity or a crit build, weakness exploit is going to be pretty good because you get the 30% affinity by hitting weak points. So that's going to be 15 raw attack at level 5. If you can get the same value, that's worth noting. Discounting the wounds piece because realistically you're going to pop them immediately. But I guess it's like fine because you do still have a little bit of bonus even on like an immediate wound pop. So like weakness exploit, burst, kind of where people are going because like that's what you should be playing for. Critical eye is worth 4 affinity per level, so 2 raw per level. That's worse than attack 5. Raw is king. Now what about foray? We have 15 attack and 20% affinity against poison or paralysis, and a lot of people are like kind of just seeding in those free statuses where like, yeah, paralysis, status spamming goes pretty good, so you can keep a high uptime on this. But what's the overall value for something so situational? 25 raw. So anything that beats 25 raw at rank 5 is going to be better. So like, yeah, having an elemental weapon is just better when you have like the elemental boost inside of it. Then we have things like maximum might and peak performance. If you stay at full health, you get plus 20 attack. So peak performance 5 versus foray 5 is going to be like 5 less raw damage, but if you're staying at full. And that can go into like actual strategy, where if someone on the team has a healing horn and is keeping everyone full, and this is only a level 2 gem that you're kind of like seeding in outside of your burst, because that is, again, the problem with burst is like, oh, it takes a level 3 for 1. So if you have level 2 slots you need to fill, peak performance might be it if you actually have like a healer dedicated on your team. Then we have counter. So what does counter do? Temporarily increases attack power after being knocked back, and you can get like 15 or 25. And once again, this is like a quick seed-in. So you actually get more effective raw value than might when using sword and shield. So if you have like higher base attack, then that means the affinity is going to be more valuable. That's also something to consider. And the more you have on Counterstrike, the longer the time is. So you might be thinking, well, like, I get knocked back and it wears off in 5 seconds, so what's the point? No, Counterstrike is actually pretty good. Even at rank 1, it lasts for 30 seconds. And then you can get up to 45 seconds. So 45 seconds of plus 25 attack after getting knocked back. And according to this guide, if you have hyper armor, you actually still get the Counterstrike buff without being knocked back. So that goes into different weapons and playstyles where actually Counterstrike is just free. So it's a very strong level 2 armor skill, but it's also dependent on player skill. Where it's like if you can get knocked back and get back into the fight, alright, cool, you just might be able to make up for the damage that way. Or if you're actually playing to just kind of grit through attacks because you're really good at the game, well, then you just have a maybe permanent plus 25 attack, which is going to be better than attack 5 potentially. And it's only going to cost 3 on the Counterstrike, so maybe that's a talisman consideration. So heroics is nutty, but it also means you're doing like speedrunner crazy, if I get looked at or breathed on I die. However, I'm getting like crazy plus 30% attack. So it's better than everything. Incredibly skill based, and maybe like some kind of strategy inside of it. But it's not just good to just have, because like, oh, maybe it procs and then I'm just defensive and I get like a strong hit in. Now, unless like you're actually playing for it, I don't see how it could go. Peak performance, 4 raw per point for being incredible and never taking damage. Worse on a per point basic than heroics, even though it's easier to maintain. So again, like, yeah, there's the skill math involvement right there. Resentment, not under control. 5 raw per point is reasonable if you can have good uptime on resentment. What's that? That name doesn't tell us anything about the skill. That's the one where you have recoverable damage. So that's like an uptime management thing. Counterstrike, again, that's great. Critical boost. If you have 100% affinity, it's worth 15% raw at level 5, which is 30 raw at 200 base. So again, like, this is the base damage versus the raw damage percentage. And then if you have 50%, it's going to be half, so 15 raw. It's, again, it's kind of expensive, but at least it's 1 per jewel levels. So again, just like critical boost 3, you have it. It's not going to be like exactly these values. And then depending on your affinity, it can actually be pretty good. However, as a baseline, you get more output from conditional bonuses like offensive guard or other stuff like that. Flare isn't worth it on sword and shield. And flare just kind of seems to be something that people aren't really considering for any build, even like weakness exploiting flare focus builds, unless like you're getting 1 point. I think that's the conclusion that this makes. Some builds are running 1 flare, 1 Partbreaker. Now, just because some builds are doing it also doesn't mean it's good. Everyone just kind of like slapping things together because they don't know all like the most efficient ways to piece together the gems and use the gear sets yet. So, you can do that. 1 flare, 1 Partbreaker, and then it's just like, you find bonus. And on some weapons and builds and playstyles, that could just beat out any other raw value you might kind of find. And that's the big breakdown right there. So builds will be coming, which is why you like, comment, subscribe, as like more optimization and testing and grinding to get to that point is done. But the quick stuff is element attack on Ardean weapons, really good. Just try to get burst into your armor. Base attack is good. And then like crit shenanigans are its own thing, and then the rest comes down to your playstyle and skill. And to a degree, what you have available in gear and decorations and how you've built out your relic weapons and stuff. So, hope you guys enjoy the video. Hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.